The Concordia Galactic Council Station hung in the void like a gleaming diamond, its spires and domes interconnected by delicate bridges that sparkled with the light of 1,000 worlds. For centuries, it had been the symbol of peace and cooperation among hundreds of species, a neutral ground where the diverse civilizations of the galaxy could gather to resolve conflicts and forge alliances. Yet beneath this impressive facade, tensions simmered between the old guard and the newcomers, between conservative species and progressives. The station operated under the watchful eyes of the multi-species Council Guard Force and a neutral moderator, whose sole purpose was to ensure fair proceedings and maintain the delicate balance of power. Today, like most days, the Grand Assembly Hall buzzed with activity as representatives from across the galaxy debated the latest interstellar policies. Ambassador Kalen Var of the Lyran species stood at the periphery of the hall, observing the proceedings with keen eyes that missed nothing. His silver-scaled skin caught the light as he tilted his head, listening intently to the heated debate. The Lyrans were relatively new to the Council, having joined only a decade ago, and despite their renowned analytical abilities and observational skills, they were often dismissed by older species as lacking political experience. Kalen's slender fingers tapped against his datapad as he made notes. He was the embodiment of Lyran values, rational, cautious, and deeply committed to the principles of the Council. Standing beside him was Alara, his sharp-witted political advisor. Her dark eyes constantly scanned the room, reading the subtle shifts in alliances and tensions that most would miss. "The Volterans are unusually vocal today," she whispered, nodding toward the imposing figures at the center of the hall. The Volterans, with their statuesque forms and ornate ceremonial armor, were among the oldest members of the Council. They spoke of tradition and order with every breath, and looked upon the newer species with barely concealed disdain. Lord Valerius seems particularly agitated by the Signan proposal, Kalen noted, referring to the tall, silver-haired Volteran ambassador who currently dominated the floor with his booming voice. From behind them came a soft beep. Reese, Kalen's network specialist, glanced up from his complex array of devices. His nimble fingers never stopped moving across the holographic interfaces as he monitored the station's communications and security networks. What Reese lacked in political acumen, he made up for with an almost supernatural ability to navigate and infiltrate digital systems. "The proposal is reasonable," Reese muttered without looking up. "The Signans are only asking for equal access to the hyperspace lanes in the Orion sector. The Volteran objection is purely political." Kalen nodded. The battle lines in the Council have been drawn more clearly in recent months. The debate about technology sharing, territorial expansion rules, and autonomy for newer members had grown increasingly heated. The conservative faction, informally led by the Volterans, expressed concerns about the dilution of the Council's core values with each new addition to their ranks. As the session concluded for the day, Kalen felt a sense of unease that he couldn't quite place. The debates were growing more hostile, the compromises fewer. Something was shifting in the careful balance of the Concordia station. "Ambassador Var," a voice called out, interrupting his thoughts. Kalen turned to see Ambassador Jorek of the Kaldani approaching with his characteristic gentle smile. The Kaldani were known for their diplomatic skills and level-headedness, and Jorek in particular had earned respect across political divides for his ability to find middle ground in the most contentious issues. "Ambassador Jorek," Kalen replied with a respectful nod. "Your intervention in today's debate was masterful as always." Jorek's violet eyes crinkled at the corners. "Kind of you to say, though I fear words of moderation fall on increasingly deaf ears these days." He lowered his voice. "I was hoping we might speak privately. There are matters of concern I'd like to discuss with a rational mind." Kalen felt a flicker of surprise. While he respected Jorek greatly, they weren't particularly close allies. "Of course. My quarters, perhaps. After the evening meal?" "Perfect," Jorek agreed, his expression momentarily grave before his diplomatic smile returned. "Until then, Ambassador." As Jorek departed, Alara moved closer. "That's interesting. The Kaldani rarely seek private audiences. Indeed, Kalen murmured. Make a note to prepare for. The rest of his words were cut off by a thunderous explosion that rocked the entire station. Alarms blared as emergency protocols activated. Ambassadors and aides alike froze in shock before pandemonium erupted. Location, Kalen demanded, turning to Reese, who was already furiously searching through security feeds on his device. Residential section, Eastern Quadrant, Reese reported, his voice tight. Ambassador quarters zone. Alara's eyes widened. Jorek's quarters are in the Eastern Quadrant. Without another word, the three of them rushed toward the source of the explosion, fighting against the tide of diplomats fleeing in the opposite direction. By the time they reached the residential section, council guards had already secured the area, led by a stern-faced Volteran officer. Restricted zone, the officer announced, blocking their path. By order of Security Command. Ambassador Jorek, is he? Kalen began. The officer's expression remained impassive. There's been an unfortunate accident. Technical malfunction in Ambassador Jorek's environmental systems. The ambassador did not survive. Kalen felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. A technical malfunction? Just minutes after Jorek had requested a private meeting about matters of concern. We require all non-security personnel to return to their quarters while the investigation continues, the officer stated flatly. As they were escorted away from the scene, Reese leaned in close to Kalen. I managed to capture some preliminary data from the security logs before they locked it down, he whispered. Something doesn't add up. Back in the safety of Kalen's quarters, Reese projected his findings onto the wall. Look at the energy signature moments before the explosion. He pointed to an anomalous spike in the data. This doesn't match any kind of environmental system failure I've ever seen. And the security logs? Kalen asked. Reese frowned. Partial at best. There's a gap, just a few seconds, right before the explosion. Could be damage from the blast, or deliberate tampering, Alara finished grimly. She had been monitoring her own networks of informants and contacts throughout the station. There were whispers already. Many found the timing suspicious. Jorek was scheduled to mediate the technology-sharing summit tomorrow. Without him, the conservative faction has a stronger position. Kalen paced the room, his mind racing. We need more information before we make any accusations. I'll see what I can extract from the sealed logs, Reese offered, already setting up his equipment. Alara nodded, and I'll put out feelers among the diplomatic staff. Someone always sees something. As his team set to work, Kalen stared out at the stars beyond his viewport. If Jorek had been assassinated, and his instincts told him this was no accident, then the fragile piece of the Concordia station was in grave danger. Over the next few days, Kalen and his team conducted their discreet investigation. They moved carefully, aware that drawing too much attention could be dangerous. The official investigation, led by the Volteran-dominated Security Division, had swiftly concluded that Ambassador Jorek's death was indeed caused by a catastrophic failure in his quarters' environmental regulation system. A tragic accident, nothing more. But Reese had found troubling discrepancies. There's evidence of tampering with the original security logs, he reported, showing Kalen a complex sequence of code. Someone erased approximately 7 seconds of footage from outside Jorek's quarters, right before the explosion. Alara had made progress as well. One of the Signan maintenance workers, Talon, claims he saw someone leaving the area immediately after the explosion before the guard arrived. The figure didn't match any of the emergency response team descriptions in the official report. Did he recognize the species? Kalen asked. Alara shook her head. He was too far away, and the emergency lighting made identification difficult. But he's terrified to come forward officially. The Signans are already facing increased scrutiny from the Volterans. This was true. In council sessions following Jorek's death, Lord Valerius had been particularly aggressive toward the Signan delegation, citing security concerns that required additional monitoring of Signan activities on the station. As their investigation deepened, obstacles began to appear. Kalen's requests for additional data were delayed or denied. Access permissions that had previously been granted to his team were suddenly revoked. Someone's watching us, Reese warned after another failed attempt to access the station's maintenance records. I've detected multiple scans of our communication channels. The warning became explicit when Kalen received an anonymous message through an old encrypted channel rarely used since the early days of Lyran membership in the Council. Cease your inquiry. The message read simply, for your own safety and that of the Lyran species. Kalen showed the message to Alara and Reese during a secure meeting in his quarters. A threat, Alara said grimly. Whoever is behind this knows we're investigating. And they're powerful enough to threaten not just us, but potentially our entire species standing in the Council, Kalen added, troubled by the implications. They decided to proceed with even greater caution, but they wouldn't stop. Jorek deserved justice, and if his death was part of something larger, the entire Council needed to know. Meanwhile, throughout the station, tensions between species were rising. Public information networks buzzed with rumors that radical Signan factions might have been involved in Jorek's death, opposed to his policies of reconciliation with the Volterans. These rumors, Alara discovered, could be traced back to sources with connections to Volteran information officers. The atmosphere in council sessions grew increasingly hostile. Lord Valerius called for a transparent investigation into Signan activities on the station, barely disguising his accusations behind diplomatic language. This is getting out of hand, Kalen remarked after a particularly tense session. The Signans are being vilified without evidence. That night, Reese made a breakthrough. Using a sophisticated infiltration method that skirted the edge of legality, he managed to access deeper layers of encrypted communications between senior Volteran officers in the Council Guard and the Volteran Command. As the three of them reviewed the decrypted messages in the secure confines of Kalen's quarters, a chilling picture emerged. Obstacle removed as planned. Alara read from one message. Proceed with Stage 2, evidence placement. And this one, Reese pointed to another communication. The moderator remained skeptical. Accelerate timeline for primary event. Kalen felt a cold certainty settle over him. They're planning something bigger than Jorek's assassination, something that will destabilize the entire council. Piecing together fragments from various communications, they began to understand the Volteran plan. Lord Valerius and his hardline faction believed the council had grown too weak and chaotic due to its diversity. They planned to engineer a series of crises, culminating in a major conflict between factions to demonstrate that the current structure had failed. Then, they would step in as the restorers of order and discipline under a Volteran model, potentially dissolving the current council and establishing a new regime under their stricter control. Jorek's assassination and blaming the Signans was just the first step, Kalen realized. They're creating an atmosphere of suspicion and fear, turning species against each other. Before they could discuss how to proceed with this devastating information, every light in Kalen's quarters flashed red. Reese's security system had been triggered. We've been detected, Reese said, his fingers flying across his console. Someone traced my access. Council guards are on their way. Multiple units. Kalen made a split-second decision. Download everything we have. We need to move now. They barely escaped through a service corridor before a squad of guards, led by Volteran officers, stormed into Kalen's quarters. From that moment, they were fugitives on the very station they had called home. Moving through the less populated areas of the massive station, they used maintenance tunnels and service routes known only to the station's workers. Reese's technical skills helped them evade security sensors, while Alara's knowledge of the station's political geography told them which areas to avoid. We need allies, Kalen said as they rested briefly in an abandoned storage area. We can't expose this conspiracy alone. Who can we trust? Reese asked, constantly monitoring security communications on his portable device. The Volterans have influence throughout the Council Guard and administration. Alara considered for a moment. Not everyone in the Guard follows the Volteran leadership blindly. There are officers from other species who might question their commands if given reason. Their first unexpected ally came in the form of Lieutenant Nara, a Council Guard officer from the Teleran species. She intercepted them in a service corridor, but, Instead of raising the alarm, she lowered her weapon. "Ambassador Var," she said quietly, "I've been ordered to bring you in for questioning regarding treasonous activities. But the orders came through irregular channels, bypassing standard protocols." Her eyes narrowed. What's really happening? After a tense moment of evaluation, Kalen took a calculated risk and shared a portion of their findings. Lieutenant Nara's expression hardened as she listened. "I've served the Council for 15 years, she said when he finished. "I swore to protect its principles, not any single species agenda." She made a decision. "I can help you move through guard checkpoints in my sector, but you'll need more allies than just me." With Nara's help, they made contact with Talon, the Signet maintenance worker who had witnessed someone fleeing the scene of Jorek's death. Terrified but convinced by the partial evidence Kalen shared, Talon agreed to help them navigate the industrial areas of the station where many Signans worked. Through Talon, they reached out to the Signan delegation itself. Initially suspicious, the Signan ambassadors became valuable allies once they saw the communications implicating the Volterans in a plot to frame their species. "We need to get this information to the entire council," the Signan ambassador, Saren, insisted. "And to our homeworlds. If the Volterans are planning a power grab, all species need to be warned." Representatives from smaller species, who had often felt intimidated by the Volterans' historical dominance, also joined their growing coalition. Each brought unique skills or knowledge that helped them evade the increasingly desperate Volteran-led search parties. Their ultimate goal became clear. They needed to reach the station's central communications hub, from which they could broadcast their evidence to the entire council and all member worlds before the Volterans could stop them. "The hub is one of the most heavily guarded locations on the station," Lieutenant Nara warned them. "Security was further tightened after your escape. Lord Valerius clearly suspects what you're planning. Is there any other way to get a message out?" Kalen asked. Reese shook his head. "The regular communication channels are all monitored. The hub is the only place with enough power and range to broadcast to all council worlds simultaneously, and with encryption that would prevent immediate blocking." They spent precious hours planning their approach. Meanwhile, through their network of allies, they learned that Lord Valerius had called an emergency council session, claiming to have conclusive evidence of Signan involvement in not only Jorek's death, but in a broader conspiracy against the council itself. He's accelerating his timeline, Alara realized. He's going to use this emergency session to push for sanctions against the Signans, maybe even their expulsion from the council. It would be the perfect catalyst for the conflict he wants to engineer. The emergency session was scheduled for the following day. They would have to act before then. Their plan was daring and dangerous. While Kalen and a small team would attempt to infiltrate the communications hub through a maintenance access point, their allies would create diversions at strategic locations around the station. The Signan delegation would attend the emergency session to defend themselves, buying time and keeping Valerius occupied. As the plan was set in motion, chaos erupted across Concordia Station. Alarms blared in multiple sectors as their allies executed carefully timed disruptions. Council guards scrambled to respond, their communications filled with confused reports. Kalen, Alara, Reese, and Lieutenant Nara, along with 2 Signan technicians, used the confusion to approach the communications hub through a rarely used maintenance tunnel. They encountered resistance. A squad of guards loyal to the Volterans had anticipated this approach, but Lieutenant Nara's insider knowledge of guard protocols helped them overcome this obstacle. As they fought their way closer to the hub, Reese monitored the station's internal communications. "Valerius has started the emergency session early," he reported grimly. "He's presenting his evidence right now." Inside the council chamber, the atmosphere was tense. Lord Valerius stood at the center, his imposing figure commanding attention as he displayed holographic images purportedly showing Signan extremists planning attacks on council facilities. "We have tolerated their disrespect for our traditions long enough," he thundered. "The evidence is clear. The Signan delegation has harbored terrorists who murdered the respected Ambassador Jorek, and now plot against the very institution that welcomed them." The Signan representatives protested vehemently, but their voices were drowned out by the growing murmurs of concern from other delegations. Without hard evidence to counter Valerius's claims, they could only deny the accusations. Meanwhile, Kalen's team reached the outer security doors of the communications hub. Reese worked frantically to override the security systems while the others stood guard. Almost there, Reese muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. A sudden explosion rocked the corridor behind them. A larger contingent of Volteran guards had found their position and were closing in fast. "We need more time," Reese shouted over the noise of weapons fire. Lieutenant Nara made a swift decision. "I'll hold them off. Get that door open." Before anyone could stop her, she moved back down the corridor, taking a defensive position at a junction. The security door finally yielded to Reese's expertise, sliding open with a soft hiss. As they rushed inside, they heard Lieutenant Nara engaging the pursuing guards, buying them precious seconds. The Central Communications Hub was a vast chamber filled with advanced technology from across the galaxy. At its center stood the broadcast core, capable of sending instantaneous transmissions to every Council world simultaneously. Guards inside, Alara warned as uniformed figures appeared from side rooms, weapons raised. A firefight erupted within the hub. One of the Signan technicians fell wounded. Kalen and Alara provided cover while Reese raced toward the broadcast controls, the data crystal containing their evidence clutched tightly in his hand. As Reese reached the controls, a new alarm sounded throughout the station. "Station-wide security alert," an automated voice announced. "All Council guards to emergency positions. Lockdown protocols initiated." "They're sealing the station," Alara realized. "Valerius knows we're making our move." Reese worked furiously at the broadcast controls, but looked up in dismay. "The system requires moderator-level clearance for an emergency broadcast. I can't override it in time." Back in the Council chamber, the emergency session had descended into chaos. Accusations flew between delegations as Lord Valerius's evidence appeared more convincing with each passing minute. The moderators struggled to maintain order, their traditional authority seeming to crumble in the face of the crisis. Valerius seized the moment. "You see now the failure of our current system," he declared. "Too much diversity, too little discipline. For the safety of all, I propose emergency powers be granted to a security council led by those with the experience to restore order." His gaze swept the room, resting meaningfully on his long-standing allies. Just as the debate reached its peak, the chamber doors burst open. Kalenvar stood there, bloodied but unbowed, flanked by Alara and the surviving members of their team. In his hand, he held a small holographic projector. "Lord Valerius speaks of evidence." Kalen's clear voice cut through the chaos. "I bring the truth. Guards, arrest these fugitives," Valerius commanded, but there was hesitation among the guards present. Lieutenant Nara had managed to reach her fellow officers, and doubt had spread about the legitimacy of the orders they had been following. In a moment of confusion, Kalen activated the projector. The decoded Volteran communications appeared in the air for all to see. The plans to remove obstacles, to place evidence, to engineer a crisis that would allow them to seize control. "This is the true conspiracy," Kalen announced. Ambassador Jorak was assassinated not by Signans, but by agents of Lord Valerius, who saw his moderation as an obstacle to their ambitions. Valerius's face contorted with rage. "Lies! Manufactured evidence from a species barely worthy of council membership." But the seeds of doubt had been planted. More guards were entering the chamber now, many from species other than Volteran, and they were listening. The moderator, a figure who had remained neutral throughout the growing crisis, stepped forward. "These are serious accusations, Ambassador Var. Do you have proof beyond these communications, which could potentially be fabricated?" It was the moment of truth. Their evidence was compelling, but not conclusive. Without access to the communication hub's broadcast capabilities, they couldn't share everything they had uncovered. "We have additional evidence," Kalen stated firmly. "But Lord Valerius's agents have blocked our access to the communication hub. I challenge him to open those channels. If my accusations are false, He has nothing to fear from transparency. All eyes turned to Valerius, whose composure was visibly cracking. This is absurd. We are wasting time while real threats. He was interrupted by a sudden flickering of the chamber's lights. The massive view screens that lined the walls, normally showing the stars beyond the station, suddenly activated simultaneously. Reese's face appeared on every screen. "Forgive the interruption," his voice echoed through the chamber. "I couldn't access the main broadcast system, but I found a backdoor into the chamber's internal communications." His image was replaced by a stream of data, security logs, communications, and most damning of all, footage recovered from outside Jorik's quarters showing a Volteran officer entering just before the explosion. "How is this possible?" Alara whispered to Kalen. "Reese was with us when we came here." "He wasn't," Kalen replied softly. "He stayed behind at the hub. This is a recording, a final message." Understanding dawned on Alara's face, followed by grief. Reese had known he couldn't override the security in time for a station-wide broadcast, so he had made a different choice, targeting only the council chamber itself, where it mattered most, and setting the system to broadcast automatically while he created a diversion elsewhere. The evidence continued to play, irrefutable and devastating. Communications between Valerius and his conspirators discussing each stage of their plan, including the final phase, when chaos reaches peak levels, secure the moderator and key ambassadors. Declare emergency governance under Volteran protection. As the evidence mounted, the atmosphere in the chamber shifted dramatically. Guards who had been loyal to Valerius began to back away from him. Ambassadors who had been swayed by his earlier arguments now looked on with horror. Valerius, seeing his plan crumbling around him, made a desperate move. Drawing a concealed weapon, he lunged toward the moderator. "If I cannot lead the council to its proper destiny, then perhaps the council should not exist at all." But he was tackled mid-stride by several guards, including some Volterans who had finally recognized the treachery of their leader. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as Valerius was subdued. In the hours that followed, fighting broke out across the station as loyalist Volteran guards resisted arrest. But with their leadership in custody and their plans exposed, they fought without coordination or purpose. Gradually, order was restored under the command of senior guard officers from other species. The cost had been high. Parts of the station lay in ruins from sabotage and firefights. Dozens had been killed, including Reese, who had sacrificed himself to create the diversion that allowed his final broadcast to reach the council chamber unimpeded. Lieutenant Nara had been seriously wounded, defending their position, but would recover. 3 days after what was already being called the darkest day, Kalenver stood before the reconvened council in a temporarily repurposed chamber, as the Grand Assembly Hall had been too damaged to use. "We gather in the shadow of betrayal," the moderator began solemnly. "Trust has been broken, lives have been lost, but the council endures. And today, we must address both justice for those who conspired against us and recognition for those who saved us." Lord Valerius and his co-conspirators had been confined pending a formal tribunal. The Volteran government had officially disavowed their actions, though suspicions remained about how much the Volteran leadership had known. Ambassador Kalen Var, the moderator continued, stepped forward. Kalen approached, acutely aware of how much had changed. Just days ago, he had been a peripheral figure, his species barely acknowledged in the greater political landscape of the council. "Your courage, insight, and dedication to the principles of this council revealed a plot that would have destroyed everything we have built together over centuries. The Lyran people have proven themselves to be not just members, but guardians of our shared ideals." The moderator gestured, and a holographic image of Reese appeared beside them. "We also honor Reese of Lyra, who gave his life to ensure the truth was heard. His name will be recorded among the heroes of the council." Similar recognitions were given to Lieutenant Nara, to the Signet allies who had helped, and to others who had stood against the conspiracy. But as the ceremony concluded, Kalen felt little triumph. Looking around at the damaged chamber, at the visible tension that still existed between delegations, At the empty seats of those who had died, he understood that the real work was just beginning. The Voltaran conspiracy had been stopped, but it had exposed deep fractures within the council. Distrust now ran rampant. Species that had been implicated, even falsely, faced suspicion. The revelation that the greatest threat had come from within had shaken the very foundation of what the council represented. As ambassadors filed out of the chamber, many nodded respectfully to Kalen, recognition that would have been unthinkable just days before. The Lyrans, once dismissed as newcomers, were now seen as vital voices in the conversations to come. Alara joined him as the chamber emptied. "The moderator has requested your input on the security restructuring," she informed him. "And 6 delegations have already asked for private meetings." Kalen nodded absently, still looking at the temporary patches covering battle damage in the walls. "Rebuilding the station will be the easy part," he said quietly. "Indeed," Alara agreed, understanding his meaning. "Rebuilding trust will be far harder." Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the turmoil that had rocked the station. Somewhere among those stars, tensions were rising on Voltaran worlds as their people faced the shame of their leaders' actions. On Signan planets, there was anger having been falsely accused. On 100 other worlds, questions were being asked about the future of the council itself. "We saved the council from destruction," Kalen mused, "but we couldn't save it from change." "Perhaps change was inevitable," Alara suggested. "Perhaps even necessary." Kalen thought of Reese, of his brilliance and sacrifice, of Jorek, whose death had been the first tremor of the crisis, of Lieutenant Nara, who had chosen principle over obedience. "If we are wise," he said finally, "we will build something stronger from these ruins. A council truly based on equality and mutual respect, not just the appearance of it." He turned from the viewport to face the damaged chamber once more. The real work begins now. As they walked together toward the first of many meetings that would shape the council's future, Kalen carried both the weight of recent losses and the hope of new possibilities. The Concordia station had been broken, but from its ashes, perhaps something more genuine could arise, a galactic council worthy of its name. The day the council turned on itself would be remembered as both an ending and a beginning. The crisis had passed, but its echoes would reshape the galaxy for generations to come.